Hello everyone, in this video we are going to discuss about ISO. ISO is a very important factor again of the exposure triangle. In this video we will try to cover why ISO is very important, what exactly is ISO, and in what conditions you'll be using ISO, or in what conditions you'll be wearing your ISO. So let's look into that today. So the first question to ask is, what is ISO? So ISO is a feature of camera. ISO is the sensitivity of your camera on how much light it can capture from the light available. This is a very important factor of the exposure triangle again. So if you remember the exposure triangle, there are three main factors. One is your shutter, the second one is your aperture, and then the third one is your ISO. So if you have not seen my videos on exposure triangle, shutter or aperture, I would definitely recommend those videos. I'll link those in my description so that you can go and watch it after this. But I think it is very important to understand the overall exposure triangle and different aspects of it, and then it will give you a good vision of what exactly this means. Typically a camera has a range of ISO. So it can start from, let's say, ISO 100 to maybe ISO 6400 or even more than that. So when you're trying to go from ISO, let's say 100 towards a higher value of ISO, what you are trying to tell camera is you're trying to capture as much as light possible from the natural light available around you. Now next question to ask is, when are those conditions where you really want the ISO to be higher, or why do you want it to be higher? And the reason, some of the scenarios why you want the ISO to be higher is because of the light outside. Now let's say if you are shooting pictures at night or in dark, then you're limited in terms of how much exposure you can get based on the natural light. So it will be difficult for you to capture a lot of light here. One way of increasing the amount of light that comes in is your shutter speed. You can always increase that, but there is a limit to that as well. So in these scenarios, what will happen is you will have to increase your ISO. The only way of getting adequate light for your picture is to increase the ISO. So now you have to use a higher ISO to make sure you are getting a right exposure for the picture. This is very common when you are, let's say, doing night photography where you are trying to take star trails or shoot Milky Ways. So here are some of the examples of some of the pictures that I have taken where again there is no natural light available. You have to really rely on your ISO to get as much as exposure as possible. Now one thing that I have observed is when you are using a DX camera, DX DSLR versus a FX DSLR, there is a big difference in same values of ISO. Obviously FX cameras give you more range of ISO as well, so you can go higher ISOs. The other scenario where your ISOs could be higher are, although let's say for example if you have enough light outside, but then you are limited in terms of your shutter speed. So let's say something is moving really fast and you have to have a fast shutter speed. In that scenario you may have to bump your ISO slightly higher, maybe go to a slightly higher value in order to make sure that you are getting enough light and you are still kind of freezing the motion. So that is another scenario. A lot of the event pictures or wedding pictures you will see are also taken at higher ISO just because of that, because during the event you want to capture those moments that happen in between, and in that case you need some higher shutter speed. There could be scenarios where you are shooting your events indoors, and that again restricts the amount of light you have. One thing that ISO does is, as you go higher in terms of ISO, you will start seeing grains in your picture. You will see some noise. Let's say this is a picture that is taken at ISO 100, which you don't see a lot of noise, but as soon as I go higher ISO, you will see there is a lot of noise, a lot of grain in it. And although you can shoot raw pictures and at the same time try to edit them, sometimes removing this noise is not possible. It's almost impossible to remove this noise. That's why sometimes you have to be careful on how much ISO value you want to increase, because as you increase you are definitely bringing more noise into the picture. So my approach typically is to keep the ISO level at minimum, which is ISO 100, ISO 125, and then I try to play it with shutter speed and my aperture to get the right exposure. Now only in cases where now it's getting too dark, or if I'm indoors, I may have to go higher ISOs, but then I'm very careful on what is my maximum ISO that I want to stay. With my Nikon D750 I have taken pictures at about ISO 4000 and those pictures still look good to me, not a lot of noise in it. So just be careful about what is your maximum value. that you want to use. Another great feature related to ISO that helps me a lot while doing events especially is the auto ISO. And not every camera has this feature, but at least I know D750, which I use, has that feature. I don't like to use that feature when I'm doing landscapes. Definitely I want to set up my ISO levels, but then if I'm doing events and things are happening too fast where I don't have time to set up each and every frame, in those scenarios sometimes I'll use that feature. And what that does is, in that feature you can set up a minimum ISO values. So what I will do is I'll set my minimum ISO value to 100, and then what you can do is define your shutter, define your aperture, which now will be constant, and let the ISO float based on the exposure required for the picture. Again, be very careful with that feature as well, because if you are putting it on ISO, auto ISO, then you are letting the camera decide where your ISO value should be, and sometimes that can go really high, which you don't want. Once I know based on the scenario what ISO levels the camera will set automatically, then I know that it won't exceed that value, and that helps me. So again, if you have any questions related to that, let me know and I can clarify more on how that auto ISO works. Make sure you subscribe my channel and click the bell icon so that you can get notifications, and let me know what you think about the content. Definitely ISO is very important to understand. If there are more things to be discussed you think related to ISO, I can definitely try to bring more content and try to explain it more. Have a good day and keep clicking.